When a crime is committed, the perpetrator inevitably leaves behind something, a description, DNA, or physical evidence. This is the criminal's print on the scene. Welcome to the Criminal Prints Podcast, episode 17.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Criminal Prints Podcast. We're thrilled to have you. Thank you very much for joining us. This is Zach.
And this is your co-host, Jaron.
And today, we're going to be talking about the disappearance of the Springfield Three. Before we start, just a quick note. If you would be so kind, please leave us a review and subscribe to whichever podcast app you listen on. It would be a huge help towards the future growth of the podcast. And I'm sure, Jaron, you would agree, it would be very much appreciated.
Yes, it would help very, very much.
So today we're going to be talking about the disappearance of the Springfield Three. On the early morning of June 7th, 1992, 3 women went missing from a quiet neighborhood in Springfield, Missouri. And Springfield, Missouri, at the time, had a population of 140,000.
We previously covered the case of Richard Patrone and Danielle Imbo, and we spoke about how strange it is for multiple people to disappear, because with more than one person, you have more than just you to fight off an invader or a bad guy or whatever it may be. Your odds of getting lost or hurt are much smaller. But in this case, it's not just 2 people disappearing, it's actually 3 people. Before we talk about the case, we're going to go over just a little bit of information about each of the 3 women, and we'll try to keep it short and pertinent information only, because, again, it is 3 people to talk about, not just our normal one.
So we have Suzanne, who went by Susie Streeter, and she was 19 years old. She was 5'5", 102 pounds. She had shoulder-length blonde hair and brown eyes.
She also had pierced ears, 2 on the left side and the upper ear as well. She had a scar on her upper right forearm, and one really interesting thing is she had a small tumor in the left corner of her mouth, which gave the appearance that she had a dip in, chewing tobacco. She was a popular girl at her high school. Interestingly, she graduated from Kickapoo High School in Springfield the night before her disappearance.
I gotta jump in real quick. I love that name, Kickapoo High School.
Definitely unique. She was employed at a local movie theater in 1992, and she planned to enroll in cosmetology school in the fall of that year, which would have followed in her mother's footsteps. We'll talk a little bit more about her mother.
So her mother is Cheryl Levitt, and she was 47 years old, 5 feet tall, 110 pounds. She had short, bleached blonde hair, brown eyes, and she also had pierced ears.
She also had freckles on her neck and upper chest, and she worked as a cosmetologist at a local salon named the New Attitudes Hair Salon. She was a private person, but her sister described her as fierce. She was very close to her daughter Susie, and she had recently done something she was very excited about. She had purchased her dream home in a nice, safe part of town on East Delmar Street.
This will be an interesting dream. Oh my, that didn't work out.
To be clear, she was the second of the 3 victims, not just the mother, but a victim as well.
And the third woman was Stacy McCall, who was 18 years old, 5 foot 3 inches tall, and 120 pounds. She had dark blonde hair, blue eyes, and once again had her ears pierced.
Her hair was lightened from the sun near the ends, and she had a very tanned complexion. She had a couple distinguishing features. She had a birthmark on her chin near her lip and right arm. She suffered from migraine headaches, and she took medicine to control them. If you know anyone that suffers from migraines, then you know how bad they are. They're extremely painful, crippling even. They're not just headaches. I only mention this to point out that she wouldn't go anywhere without her meds on her.
Her mother said in an interview on Crime Watch Daily, which, let me add, I absolutely love Crime Watch Daily, that she was often called Spacey Stacy. And this is because she would say space cadet type of things.
And on that note, she hung out with the goofy kids, as you'd probably expect from the previous nickname.
She was employed as a secretary or a receptionist at Springfield's Gymnastics at the time of her disappearance, and she also modeled wedding gowns for the total bride in the Brentwood Center.
In fact, she was on a local TV advertisement for the bridal shop. She was a pretty girl, and that's kind of a cool part-time job.
That is very cool.
So she also graduated from Kickapoo High School in Springfield, Missouri the night before, and she planned on attending Southwest Missouri State University in the fall of 1992.
So they just graduate. I'm sure they're as happy as can be because they finished high school, and then things get very interesting very soon.
One interesting thing to note is the girls were really good friends growing up, like when they were young. But according to Stacy's mother, they kind of grew apart as they got older. They just had different groups of friends. But as you'll soon find out, they clearly had no animosity for each other as they came together to celebrate their graduation. So that brings us into June 6th of 1992.
So as we mentioned, Susie and Stacy both graduated from Kickapoo High School in Springfield, Missouri that evening. So Susie spent the early part of the evening having dinner at home with her mother, Cheryl. And the friends met up, as I'm sure many of our listeners have done when they've graduated, and went to a graduation party.
The girls planned to stay at a hotel in Branson, Missouri overnight, and then visit the Whitewater amusement park in the morning. Susie called Cheryl, her mother, at approximately 10:30 p.m. to discuss the plans, and Stacy also called her mother to inform her. Stacy's mother was very relieved as she was worried about Stacy driving that night because, there's a lot of drinking and things like that going on. So she was relieved to hear the plans.
So then the mother, Cheryl, telephoned a friend at approximately 11:15 that evening. And she was painting a chest of drawers at the time and gave absolutely no indication that anything was wrong or anything was amiss with her residence. So Susie and Stacy left the party at 2 a.m. and returned to Cheryl's residence at approximately 2:15. It was roughly a 15-minute drive. They had decided that their friend's house was just too crowded to stay there that night.
So now we're on June 7th in the very early morning. So Susie had a brand new king-size waterbed that she invited Stacy to share with her for the night. And they were going to continue with a plan to meet their friends at the Whitewater Amusement Park in Branson later in the day. The girls drove separate vehicles to Cheryl's house. So the next morning, Susie's best friend, Niall Holderby, called to arrange plans to go to the water park, but she had to leave a voicemail because nobody picked up the phone. Stacy's mother at the same time was also trying to get a hold of Stacy.
When the friends got there, they noted that all three cars were at the house, but there was an interesting twist to this, Jaron, and I'm sure you would agree that Susie always parked in the same spot. She was a little bit OCD with her parking spot. And her car was not parked in the carport, which was her normal spot.
But otherwise, the house seemed almost completely normal. I say almost because there was one obvious strange thing going on, and that's that the front porch light, the glass covering that goes over the bulb, was shattered and glass was all over the porch, but the light bulb was still intact. So the friends that were there, they actually swept up the glass and they placed it in a dumpster across the street because they didn't know it was a crime scene.
Oh my goodness.
So the front door was unlocked. That did cause some suspicion, but not a lot because it was a fairly quiet area. The TV was on, but it was showing, and we're going to show our age a little bit here, the TV was showing snow. So basically, somebody had been watching it at some point, but the program had ended or the movie had ended, whatever it was, it ended, and it was just a fuzzy screen.
Susie's dog, Cinnamon, was extremely unhappy, and barking at them and completely freaked out. And on a side note, this was actually abnormal for the dog because the dog was a great dog, very well behaved. And according to Stacy's mother, the house was immaculate. There were no signs of a struggle, and Cheryl had either made the bed or not gone to bed because it didn't look like it had been slept in.
All three women's purses were lined up neatly at the bottom of the steps that led down to Susie's bedroom. So there's a couple interesting things here. Cheryl's purse still had cigarettes in it. And keep in mind, she was a chain smoker. And it also had almost $1,000 of deposits in her purse. Stacy's purse had her migraine medicine in it. And again, Zach, we grew up with somebody in the family that had migraines, and we know that that's not something you'd leave behind.
Certainly, there's no way she would leave that medicine behind on her own.
So there was also makeup smeared washcloths found in the hamper in the bathroom. And so that, to me, indicates that the girls had got home and removed makeup for the night.
I agree, they were in the house at some point. It appeared that Susie's bed had been slept in. And we know that initially the friends didn't want to call 911 because they didn't think anything was necessarily out of order. You know how it is, Jaron. They figured, hey, they could be back any minute now. Maybe they went to the store. They just made a quick errand.
Exactly. In fact, Stacy's mother was actually there at this time, and they just thought, well, they will be back any minute. Nothing seems amiss. So while they waited, Zach, something very unfortunate happened. We already mentioned that they cleaned up the glass, but they did a bunch of things while they were there. They straightened up a window blind that was bent in a strange way. They washed some dishes. They cleaned ashtrays. They sat in the couches and they all walked around. And here's a really interesting one. There was a voicemail that they listened to it's just been described as very sexual and very lewd. And they accidentally deleted the voicemail.
This is absolutely terrible. Bless their heart, they didn't understand exactly the situation, and I'm not going to fault them for that. They were trying to be helpful and do what they could do to help their friends. Unfortunately, we know that this completely wreaked havoc on the case.
In fact, as they cleaned up, they were getting ready to leave, and the phone rang. They answered the phone, and yet again, here was this guy on the phone making sexual comments and being lewd. They hung up on him. And again, we don't know when or how the voicemail got erased, but we do know it got erased. So they did call police. When police arrived, it had been 10 hours since the friends first arrived on the scene.
This is so unfortunate because the voicemail was deleted. This individual calls back. Now, it certainly could just be a prank call, but it also could have absolutely been the person responsible for this crime.
And as somebody that grew up around this time, prank calls were really, really common. But nonetheless, this is something that you would want to heavily investigate.
So the police took it extremely seriously and filed a missing persons report with foul play suspected, which is really cool that they immediately went to work on it. And unfortunately, as we talked about with the friends and family cleaning up the house, it destroyed pretty much all of the evidence.
Any fingerprints, any DNA, we know there was that voicemail, all of that stuff was gone. In fact, to put it in perspective, they say about a dozen people went through that house before the police arrived.
So one thing they did find is as they searched the house, they found satanic material in Susie's bookshelf. And this is a crazy twist, but it turns out that her boyfriend had been arrested for being part of a grave robbing gang.
But when it was investigated more, they found that she dumped him and possibly even was the one that turned them in. And she was going to testify against them in just a few months. So, of course, you'd think, maybe they thought, hey, let's take her out so she can't testify against us.
It's certainly possible there's some motive there. The young men who were involved in the grave robbing were investigated and cleared. Now, having said this, there's many, many people that believe that they should not have been cleared,
including some people that are pretty close to the case. So, one of the more interesting pieces of evidence, or I don't know if I should call it that, one of the more interesting tips that came in was a witness that said she saw Susie driving an old green panel van.
And keep in mind, this is after they would have went missing. And this was only 2 miles from the house. So it's after, it's very close to the house. And the witness said that Susie looked scared. The witness also claimed that she heard someone in the van, a man's voice, threatening her to keep driving. This is like something you'd hear in a horror movie.
Yeah, they said, don't do anything stupid. Police desperately wanted more information on this van, as you would expect. They even went so far as to get a van like it, park it in front of the police station, just to try to jog memories of people in the area. More tips did come in, pointing to this van, but strangely they got it in different colors, not just green, and nothing of significance ever came from the van. So Zach, there's one thing about this that just seems strange to me. You know, you can notice people's emotions in vehicles next to you, stuff like that, but it's really strange to hear a conversation or people talking next to you.
That is very strange. The person, the man in this case, would have had to been talking extremely loud.
And remember, he wasn't visible. They say that he was behind Susie so they could hear him but not see him. That's just odd.
Just another thought that comes to my mind is, were the windows down? I mean, that would have made it much easier, but I agree, it is very difficult to hear, especially if the windows are up in both vehicles. So now we're going to talk about Susie's brother, Bart Streeter. So he moved out of his mother's home after an argument, and Susie actually moved in with him for some time. But she eventually moved out because she said that he had trouble staying sober.
So they were estranged at the time of this disappearance. So police investigated him, but they just couldn't find anything that connected him to the case, and he hasn't been thoroughly investigated since. But there's a couple of things that he has done since that seem significant, knowing, that his mother and his sister disappeared. In 2000, he was convicted of attempted kidnapping in the first degree and coercion. These were both felonies. And just very recently, in March of 2019, he was waiting for somebody at a nail salon. This somebody ended up being a 15-year-old girl, and he claimed, yeah, that's my granddaughter, I'm her grandpa. But the girl said, I don't know that guy. I've never seen him in my life. So the cops are called, he's locked out, the police come, they arrest him for public intoxication, disorderly conduct, and attempted false imprisonment. Really, really, really creepy dude.
Goodness gracious, Bart, what in the world are you thinking?
But in truth, he maybe isn't the best suspect in the world because they just had nothing tying him to the case.
So now we're going to talk about Robert Craig Cox. And Robert was an Army Ranger and actually was Soldier of the Year one year. A tip was received from Florida saying that Robert was involved in the disappearance of the Springfield Three, and ironically, he had just moved to Springfield weeks before the disappearance. Another interesting note is Robert actually worked at the dealership with Stacy's dad.
And they say that Stacy would often go to the dealership actually to deliver lunch to her father, which is just really a sad twist in this whole thing. Because that's such a nice thing to do, and the thought that that might have put her in danger is just sickening. So a little bit more on Robert Craig Cox. He's a convicted kidnapper and robber. But the night he had a quote-unquote rock-solid alibi from his girlfriend. She later recanted that alibi.
Imagine that. So he got a new alibi, as of his other alibi was complete trash. And Jaron, who do you think his new alibi was from?
It was from his parents.
Goodness gracious. Robert. So he gets a new alibi from his parents after his old alibi completely tanks.
Yeah, and a little more about him, as if he doesn't sound bad enough already. He was actually investigated for another murder once, but he wasn't charged. He did spend 9 years in prison for abducting 2 girls, and he is currently serving time in Texas for another crime. So we also have some really strange quotes that he gave in an interview once. Zach, you want to go ahead and read them?
Now, I will say these quotes just completely baffle me. What in the world? Why would an innocent person say these? So Robert, talking about the Springfield Three, said, quote, "I just know that they are dead. That's not my theory. I just know that." Close quote. Well, how in the world would you know that, Robert? Robert also said that he won't say more until his mother passes away. And on a side note, she's in her mid-80s. If these aren't red flags going off everywhere, I don't know what is. Why in the world would he say these things, Jaron?
Yeah, you do see sometimes these terrible criminals will say stuff like this for attention. They like to take credit for cases they didn't do, which seems so backwards to a normal person's way of thinking. But it is possible he's full of it. And, I wish his mother a long and happy life, but I really wish he wouldn't wait for her to pass away to tell the truth if he did know more.
Exactly.
So this takes us into a really weird part of the case, and it's about the local hospital parking garage.
Kathy Baird, who is a reporter, gets a tip that they are buried under the parking garage. And it was actually a dirt lot at the time of the disappearance. Having said this, the cops did not take the tip seriously. So Kathy took matters in her own hands and hired someone to do ground scanning radar.
So when the man did the ground scan radar, he found 3 voids. He found 2 voids together and one a little ways apart from the 2. The man performing it also believed that these matched old graves that he's seen in the past, but the police don't believe this is possible, as the parking garage was built a year later, and they think that area would have been excavated during the building process of this garage, and that does make sense.
That is a very valid point because there would have certainly been excavation done. The reporter Kathy, Jaron, I would say it's fair to say, what do you think, that she's doubted by many in the true crime community?
Yeah, she definitely is. So there's a well-known interview with Crime Watch Daily where she claims she knew exactly what happened to the women, but she was afraid for her safety, so she couldn't say what it is. In fact, we're going to play a quick clip of that, and we'll just let you judge for yourself on her tone and her words.
I believe I know what happened. I believe they were killed before morning.
Who do you think was the target?
It wasn't Stacy.
What do you believe the motives were for the people that took Stacy, Cheryl, and Susie?
I'm not going to talk about that. Sorry you don't think that I'm giving you the answers that you need or you want, but I live here. And yeah, I'm afraid for my safety.
What kinds of things have happened?
We've been boxed in by cars before, and somebody came up to me and asked if I was Kathy Baird, and I said yes. And then he said, well, the people I work for make people like you disappear too.
So, death threats?
I've been advised to leave this case alone.
How strange is this, that you claim you know what happened, you're on television telling the world, but you only talk so much because you're afraid that something will happen to you?
Yeah, then why would you come forward and do this highly publicized interview? That makes no sense at all.
Kathy, that's absurd.
It seems like she likes the attention, to me.
Agreed, completely agreed. So, Jaron, let's get into current status now. The police still get a few tips a month, and they look into it, but unfortunately, as of now, there haven't been any promising developments.
The only one that you could say maybe is promising is Robert Craig Cox, if he was involved, confessing, right? That is probably our best path forward, I would think, at this moment.
I agree. That would certainly be a game changer.
but it is still being diligently investigated. I have a quick quote from Janice McCall, that's Stacy's mother. She says, "There are still so many people who know about it. They come up to me, they talk about them, and it makes me feel good when I know people are still caring."
That is really cool. So many people out there care and would like to see a conclusion to this case. So Cheryl and Susie's relatives actually had them both declared legally deceased in 1997, so just 5 years after their disappearance.
Unfortunately, Zach, I think you'd probably agree with my thoughts that these women most likely are deceased.
I hate to say it, but I by the evidence, by what we have to work with, I think it's a very safe statement that they have passed away.
So let's go over just some quick thoughts of different topics in this investigation. One, how unfortunate that there's no DNA, there's no fingerprints, there's really no crime scene analysis because of the extensive cleanup before the cops arrived or were called.
And that is so sad because the friends, they all had good intentions. They weren't trying to do anything to damage the scene because at the time they didn't know it was a crime scene. But it's just very sad that it completely destroyed the entire crime scene. You had up to a dozen people in there walking around. It completely contaminated the crime scene. Jaron, what about the green panel van? This is a very intriguing note.
That really is very intriguing. It seems like a tip that really could be. At the same time, it seems like there's just nowhere to go with a tip like this. Unfortunately, it by itself just doesn't buy the police anything really to work with.
And we do know that the police investigated this very thoroughly and gave it their all trying to locate this green van.
They clearly took it very seriously, thought it was a very credible tip, but it just didn't pan out.
Makes me wonder if it was somebody from out of town that had that van. What about her brother, Jaron? What do you think about her brother?
Well, her brother definitely seems like a total creep, especially knowing what he did even just up to in March of this year. But he probably wasn't involved in any way in this case.
I agree. It didn't sound like, in my opinion, they had anything concrete linking him to it. Oh boy, old Robert Craig Cox. I would say it's more than a fair statement to say he's a prime suspect. By the statements he's made, he certainly would have had the training, the ability to make 3 people disappear. What are your thoughts on Robert Craig Cox?
Well, it's like you say, he was an Army Ranger, and these girls, the heaviest among them was 120 pounds. So he could easily manhandle them. And you know, it's quite possible that he didn't need to. Maybe just get them in a bad position and I don't know. I hate to speculate on exactly what happened, but I do think he's definitely the prime suspect in this case.
I agree. I think there's more than enough red flags that go up when we talk about Robert Craig Cox. So we've got the hospital and Kathy Baird. She did investigate. She brought in somebody to do a ground scan. She clearly feels very strongly that this is a location of the bodies. She even goes as far as to say she knows what happened. But then she also gives you a complete curveball in refusing to say more and saying she's scared and feels threatened. I'm not saying she doesn't know anything, but I am going to say I find it extremely unlikely because I think she's probably in it for the attention.
So if you're interested in knowing if this part of the case will be looked into further, that being the anomalies at the hospital parking garage, the answer is probably no. The hospital says they're more than happy to cooperate with any police investigation, and the police say we're not at all interested in checking these voids. So it's probably not going to happen. So Zach, do you think there's any hope of this case being solved?
I certainly do. I think that it's possible, and I hope and pray that Robert, if he is involved, that he does talk once his mother passes away. And that's, at this point, somebody could brag about it. It could be a possible deathbed confession. I think even though there isn't a lot now, I think they're just one tip away from finding what they need.
The unfortunate thing, how I see it, is that the best chance of solving this case is a confession of some sort. And, that's just, it's always more unlikely than just solving a case. So that's unfortunate. But yeah, I agree. There is hope of solving this case, and I pray that happens.
So that is episode 17, The Disappearance of the Springfield Three. I want to personally thank all of you that have listened to us every week and continue to listen to us. Thank you to all our new listeners. We hope you enjoyed the show. Please check out our Facebook and our Twitter. Our Twitter is @PodcastCriminal. So everybody, have an absolutely fantastic day.
And remember, keep your record clean and your prints off the scene.